Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. We look at what's happening at ATA, explore the benefits of membership, and discuss the translation and interpreting professions. You know, the T&I industry is changing rapidly. We hope this podcast will help you keep up with it. ATA was founded over 60 years ago to advance the translation and interpreting professions and foster the professional development of individual translators and interpreters. We have nearly 10,000 members in some 100 countries. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information for you at the end of the show. And you'll also find links in the notes. All right, let's start off with a few quick announcements.
Listen up, translators and interpreters. We've got a call to action. The Administrative Office of the Pennsylvania Courts has published new rules for court interpreter compensation. Although advocacy efforts by the Tri-State Language Access Coalition have paid off, some steep trade-offs have been proposed. These include reduced travel compensation and a 50% cut in remote interpreting pay. The time to support our colleagues and speak up is now. The T&I community has until June 21st to comment on the proposed compensation package. We've put links in the show notes to tell you more and share how you can send your comments. Also, if you're thinking about joining ATA, now's the time. ATA's special mid-year membership rate is now available for a limited time. If you join ATA during the month of June, you'll save 50% on your 2021 membership with payment of your 2022 dues. That is a full 18 months, and you can even pay in installments if that works better for you. Plus, if you join now, you'll get instant access to this month's free members-only webinar and immediately save $45. This month's webinar is all about setting up and managing a term base. Terminology management is an essential tool in any translator's toolbox, and this webinar will help you master it so you can work smarter, not harder. ATA members can access it on demand anytime during the month of June. With a free on-demand webinar for members every single month, they can save up to $540 a year on continuing education. And finally, some networking news. ATA's Business Practices Education Committee is hosting its second virtual brainstorming network event on Tuesday, June 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Join your colleagues for a fun, fast-paced hour of solving common business challenges in small teams. Over 100 people participated in the last one, and it was a blast. Come and meet new people, expand your network, and share your own experiences. Registration is free, but limited to ATA members. For more information on each of these announcements and more, look for the links in this episode's notes.
All right, we're back. Today we're talking about advocacy, language advocacy that is, and the work of ATA's Advocacy Committee. This great team of volunteers has certainly had its hands full in this year. After AB5 came COVID-19. There's so much that's been going on. It was really time to catch up with our colleagues. So joining me today is Lorena Ortiz Schneider. Lorena is an ATA board member and chair of ATA's Advocacy Committee. She is an ATA certified Spanish to English translator, an ATA credentialed interpreter, and a California state certified administrative hearing interpreter. Lorena has worked for the U.S. Department of State as a liaison and seminar interpreter, as a conference interpreter for private industry, and as a community interpreter in mental health and workers' compensation settings. She's also a cross-cultural communications licensed interpreter trainer, practicing translator and interpreter, and a business owner. In 2019, Lorena founded the Coalition of Practicing Translators and Interpreters of California, also known as COPTIC, a nonpartisan, nonprofit advocacy group formed as a response to AB5, the gig worker law that sought to reclassify translators and interpreters in 2020. She was a board member of the California Workers' Compensation Interpreters Association, and she also served as assistant administrator of ATA's interpreter division. She's based in Santa Barbara, California. Lorena, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here.
You know, I read in the latest issue of the ATA Chronicle that you were awarded the J. David Edwards Power of Advocacy Award, given out by the Joint National Committee for Languages. Congratulations.
Thank you, Matt.
Now, the award recognizes language advocates in the field who have exhibited excellence in grassroots advocacy. And I have to say, the news that you won this award came as no surprise to me. As I just mentioned, you are, first of all, extremely busy translator, interpreter, very, very involved. And what many ATA members and listeners should know is that you've been working tirelessly to educate lawmakers about our professions and win an exemption for translators and interpreters in AB5. Now, we're going to talk about AB5, of course, today, as well as the PRO Act, which we'll get into. But first, I'd like to ask you about COVID, which really wreaked havoc in the interpreting world. And also in the same issue of the ATA Chronicle, you were one of several translators and interpreters who shared what receiving the COVID-19 vaccine meant to you. And when I read it, I thought right away, I said, this is really a story about advocacy. So can you share that story about how you were able to get vaccinated in the first round?
Yes, it is indeed a story about advocacy. Even though most of the interpreting that my colleagues and I do around here is in the workers' comp and mental health space, and not at the hospitals or clinics, which have their own staff interpreters or rely on trained bilingual staff, I knew that at some point we would be asked to go on site once, things started opening up again. We'd been working remotely for months during the whole COVID pandemic with the appeals board and the medical provider offices doing the same. But some attorneys and medical providers were burning out on the whole Zoom thing. And while they continued business as usual from the comfort of behind their screens, they were asking their clients and patients, and therefore the interpreters, to come on site and work on site. As you can imagine, arrangements for safe distanced interpreting was really not on their radar, given the fact that it seems like we're always an afterthought.
Right.
So, when the vaccines started to be rolled out, I figured that the best way to protect ourselves against the inevitable was to see what I could do to get us in line for them. And remember that this came at the heels of the letter that ATA sent to the CDC back in December of 2020.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, we asked them to include interpreters that were working in on-site settings in phase 1 alongside other frontline personnel. Well, one of our clients is a health system in town, and we'd been doing a lot of translation work for them during the whole pandemic, bending over backwards, trying to ensure that their communications were rolling out in a timely fashion. And so I just asked them, I said, hey, can we get first in line to get the vaccines? And, since I had this relationship with these people who respected and understood what we did, they said yes. I mean, it was really that easy. Now, the more difficult part was figuring out what box to check on the eligibility attestation form that the public health department came out with, because interpreters were not listed by name. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had to get creative, and we decided that the closest one description to what we did was employed community health workers with direct patient contact, including promotoras. Do you know what promotoras are, Matt?
No.
So this is a term used here in California, especially for community health workers. They tend to be, lay Latino community members who receive specialized training to provide basic health education to their communities. And also the term employed or employee was the only term on any of these forms. And my colleagues were really confused and kind of, concerned about how they were going to get around that, because they're freelance interpreters, right? So I said to them, well, who do you work for? And they said, well, I work for myself. So I said, well, when you fill out the form, just list yourself as your employer. And, nobody batted an eye. The applications went through, and just a little bit more of, client education, I guess, right there. Right. And that's how we got the vaccines in January.
Wow. Nice work. That effort got you and a number of people, not just yourself, but a number of people vaccinated. Now, I understand the advocacy committee has been, working on a national level, advocating nationwide for early access to vaccines, as well as safe working conditions for in-person interpreters during the pandemic. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, after ATA sent that letter to the CDC in December, we also sent another one in January to the new director, Walensky, and we were urging her to include medical interpreters and court interpreters by name in the guidelines, because the absence of us in the guidelines was actually leading to dangerous scenarios for interpreters. We didn't get a response to that letter, sadly, but I do feel that ATA going on record with the CDC helped colleagues in various states convince their own public health departments to include them. Because, gaining visibility for our professions through our association was something that was much appreciated by members who shared their stories with us.
And now I'd like to talk about the advocacy work that ATA does on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. every year. And this year's event was virtual, of course, but I read that you had record attendance and also that members were able to participate in 2 language advocacy events within just a few weeks. Can you tell us about those events?
Yes, of course. Well, one of them was Language Advocacy Days, sponsored by JNCL, and the other one was ALC's, which is the Association of Language Companies on the Hill Day. And I attended the first one in February. I didn't attend ALC's. However, members from our advocacy committee, Caitlin Walsh and Dr. Bill Rivers did. Of course, he put that one on because he is ALC's lobbyist. But just to let you know, or talk about a little bit about my experience at this year's Language Advocacy Days through JNCL, as compared to last year, which I attended in person just right before COVID hit, this year was very inspiring and powerful. There were more translators and interpreters participating than the year before, probably thanks to the remote aspect of it. And in my California delegation, I was pleased to have more than one other translator interpreter colleague, because last year the delegation was about 15 people large, mostly composed of educators, and there were only 2 of us. And we got maybe 2 minutes at the very end to address issues affecting translators and interpreters. But this year, colleagues such as fellow board member and expert in all things ASTM and localization, Lorena Brandt was there. Renee Jordanet, who was a former dean of the translation and interpretation program at the Monterey Institute, was in our delegation. And so was advocacy committee member Jennifer Santiagos, who, by the way, played a really important role in the coalition's success last year in getting the exemption for translators and interpreters from AB5. And, we met with staffers for Senators Feinstein and Panetta, who is the son of Leon Panetta from Monterey, language capital of the world.
Yeah,
yes. We met with Congressman Salud Carbajal from my neck of the woods here, who happens to be the son of immigrant farm workers. And we also met with Congressman Ted Liu, who happens to also be a naturalized citizen of Taiwanese descent. And so all of them very, friendly towards languages and language access.
What were some of the issues you discussed with the lawmakers?
Well, we addressed the lack of visibility of our professions and how supporting the learning of world languages could lead to, fruitful and well-remunerated careers in translation and interpretation and its associated positions, because most of what JNCL does is for educators, for promoting the learning of world languages in K through 12. And we did this because we found that lawmakers usually have no idea about the fact that a whole industry like ours even exists. And so we asked them to co-sponsor the reintroduction of the Coronavirus Language Access Act and Health Equity and Accountability Act, which would declare language access as a medical necessity. That was a big thing. We also asked them to co-sponsor the reintroduction of the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, and that would bring into alignment the term employee with common law in order to get rid of this ambiguity around misclassification of translators and interpreters. And we also asked them to co-sponsor the reintroduction of what's called the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act, which would cover training and credentialing. And then, the most important issue that we were able to hone in on was the PRO Act, which had just been reintroduced earlier in the month and contained the strict, ABC test, much like the devastating AB5 did in California, which threatens to misclassify professional interpreters and translators as employees nationwide. So we pointed out the fact that in California, we were very successful in earning an exemption from AB5 last year in last year's legislative session. And while we, wanted to acknowledge that worker protections are essential for some occupations, ours is just not one of them. So, we asked them if they would please take a look at that and oppose the PRO Act unless amended to include an exemption for professional translators and interpreters from employment status.
Did you feel that you as a group were well received despite it being virtual, not as personal as in past years?
Yeah, we did. In fact, we got even more time this time around than we did last time. And I'm not sure if that's a function.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it may be a function of the remote aspect, right? Because there just are less people roaming the halls, as it were.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember, I participated in Advocacy Days a few years ago when the conference was in Washington, and you're so right when you say that. Every office we went to was just like this bustling, activity, and people were coming and going, and people were in the lobbies and standing in the hallway, and we were even told that if your meeting takes place in the hallway, don't be, offended by that. That just happens. It's just the way things happen on Capitol Hill. So, wow, sounds really interesting, and glad to hear that you were well received by the lawmakers, and will be definitely following the PRO Act with great interest over the coming months. Now, we announced earlier in the podcast, in the announcements, a call to action. And it has to do with the Pennsylvania court interpreters fee schedule that was recently published. What's going on in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so Tatiana Hay, who's a court interpreter colleague out in Pennsylvania, reached out to the Advocacy Committee last February for help. She and a small cohort of her colleagues had been working hard since the previous summer on convincing the Administrative Office of the Courts to listen to them around this proposed fee schedule amendment that would impose really untenable working conditions and pay on court interpreters without their input. And they were just spinning their wheels. So I shared my experience here in California with her, and they ended up forming a coalition of their own, TSLAC, the Tri-State Language Access Coalition. They hired an experienced advocate, and guess what? Just last month, they got a seat at the table. And in fact, the proposed amendments are out now. They're open to public comment. And this is something that Tatiana and her group were told would never happen. So to me, it's just one more example of how important having a professional advocacy program is for us. We tend to point out how people think any bilingual can do our work as translators or interpreters. Right. And yet I think sometimes we also think that we can affect change in the halls of Congress or, lawmakers. And don't get me wrong. We can and we must, because lawmakers at the end of the day work for their constituents, right? And they have to listen to us. But, having a professional strategist who knows what they're doing, who knows the players, the lay of the land, I think is really crucial to us being successful in getting what we need for ourselves.
Excellent. That's a great story. It sounds awesome. Another success story. What other issues? Let's talk about some of the other issues the committee is working on right now.
Yeah, sure. We have a few things lined up. One of them is voter voice with JNCL. We got a website revamp that we're looking to do. We're working on a proposal to present to the board to hire a professional lobbyist or advocate. And, we're also open to anything else that comes up. For those of you listening, we're here to support you in any struggles or threats that you might be facing. And we really hope that ATA can be that place, that association for translators and interpreters where they can turn to for help. A place where people who care about language access and growing their global presence can turn to for support. And also a place where the government might turn to for knowledge and expertise. I mean, that's my dream at least, right? One of the reasons why I
Right.
said yes to the board nomination.
Right. And just to let everybody know, we'll have contact information in the show notes if anybody wants to get in touch with Lorena and the committee. So definitely take a look out for that. Now, you just mentioned the voter voice with the JNCL. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, Voter Voice is a really cool program that JNCL just acquired. And by the way, ATA has been a member of JNCL for like the last 30 years. And, former ATA President Caitlin Walsh is currently the president elect of JNCL. And she's also our delegate to JNCL. And so through her, we will be able to track bills that come down the pike, either at the federal or state level, by putting keywords into this program. And that way, hopefully be able to act instead of react to things that may be of interest to our members. And again, for podcast listeners, if there's anything in your backyard that concerns you, let us know. And then we can turn to JNCL and Voter Voice and try and keep tabs on whatever those things may
Yeah.
be, and therefore help out.
Yeah, it sounds like a nice way to get even more proactive about these issues.
Exactly. Mhm.
You also mentioned a website revamp.
Yeah, since that fabulous new website came out, right? ATA, I think it was last year. It's wonderful. But we just haven't had the chance to submit our input to ATA for some changes, even though we've been asked. And so we'd like to see like sort of a standalone advocacy section, a place where members can go to um, download resources on how to add their little grain of salt to advocacy efforts, um, and just a place for resources, for news, for outreach, that sort of thing. So we're trying to get that going.
Right on. And lastly, you mentioned a proposal to the board about hiring a professional advocate or a lobbyist.
Yeah, at the last board meeting, the board seemed very interested in finally, paying for a professional, just much like we pay for our PR people, right? And so we'd like to work on a proposal with a dollar number of funds to earmark in order to hire a professional, either advocacy strategist or lobbyist or lobbying firm, something that will meet the growing needs of our professions to, you know, have a voice on Capitol Hill and in the state legislatures. Um, After all, we are a $56 billion industry and only getting bigger and bigger. I've been seeing more and more formal requests for proposals coming down the pike from local agencies, whereas before they would just reach out to, our company uh, for translation or interpreting services. So I think as a whole, our country is becoming more aware that translators and interpreters exist, that it's a profession, and we need to have a voice, right, in the shaping of all kinds of things that that will affect us eventually.
Speaking of us all having a voice with what happened in California last year with AB5, and, we've got PRO Act being reintroduced. And I understand there's some copycat laws in a number of states. How can I, as an individual, get involved and help the cause, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're going to be rolling out a strategy here pretty soon to engage people who are interested in advocating to keep their independence. Um, you know, uh, we didn't really talk about what the PRO Act actually does. So if I could, I just want to, you know, frame it for our podcast listeners a little bit. The PRO Act is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, and it's one of the most significant bills um, to come up in a while to strengthen workers' abilities to organize. In fact, in the last 80 years, I think. And when workers work for a single employer, more easily organized into unions. And the PRO Act contains this provision that could wreak havoc, right, with the majority of translators and interpreters, because prong B of part 101B of the bill, as it's written, will misclassify most of us. 75% of us, whom, as we know, are freelancers. We're independent contractors by fact, by choice. And so what happens is that the PRO Act threatens, just like AB5 did in California, to destroy our livelihoods and endanger, reliable language access for the millions of Americans that we serve. And, last year in California, we worked really hard to get an exemption to educate lawmakers, to work with state legal counsel, legislators, and their staff. And we won. We did get an exemption from AB5. So can you imagine how disastrous it would be for our language service industry to have to refight that battle all over again, or even worse, have our hard won progress out here in California just be reversed if this weren't fixed? And
No,
so
no, I can't imagine it, to be
I
honest with
know,
you.
right? Yeah, so the time is now. The time is now to start educating and engaging with federal lawmakers to fix it. And I think that's pretty much why ATA's advocacy committee has made this a priority for us, for our members, and frankly, for the entire profession. So to answer your question, um, we will be rolling out a strategy here pretty soon to try and get members to engage. Um, and, you know, it really is incumbent upon each and every one of us to engage in this advocacy um, piece right now. Uh, I don't know if you've watched the documentary Crip Camp.
I have
Have you heard
not.
of it? So this
No, I
is
have
really
not.
cool. So if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Okay, if you're at all curious about advocating for yourself, it's a 2020 Sundance Film Festival award-winning documentary. It was nominated for the Oscars for Best Documentary Feature. I don't know if it won or not because I didn't watch the Oscars, but it was produced by the Obamas, and it's this documentary about disabled teenagers in the 1970s who came together at Camp Jened in upstate New York to explode, the confines of discrimination, isolation, and all the institutionalization that comes with being disabled. It was super powerful and inspiring. And one of the producers, or actually not the producers, but well, maybe she was. Anyway, one of the main protagonists is this woman named Judith Heumann, and she's a civil rights advocate for people with disabilities. And she said, if you don't demand what you believe in for yourself, you're not going to get it. And Matt, when I saw that documentary, it was just so inspiring to me, because that's really what we did in California last year. Little tiny individual translators and interpreters, spoke truth to power And we were able to accomplish something that very few occupations did in last year's legislative calendar. So hopefully we can bring that to ATA, and get some movement on the PRO Act.
Sounds good. Sounds like a fascinating story. I definitely have to check it out.
Yeah.
Now, one final question. I want to give you a chance to get on your soapbox here for if you're looking for more volunteers, you want to make a call out to listeners right now. How can ATA members, if they're interested, join the advocacy committee, or even get more involved in ATA's language advocacy efforts on maybe an informal basis?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as I mentioned before, we're definitely looking for somebody to help us with our website page. So if you have any skills or expertise in that, please contact us. And again, once we start rolling out our strategy for the upcoming PRO Act, reach out to us and let us know what you can do in your neck of the woods. There will be certain key states that we'll be looking at. And so hopefully reaching out to members in those states to contact those senators and congresspeople. But, overall and in general, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. If you hear something or see something in your state that can affect our professions and you need our help, just reach out. My email's all over the place. We also have the advocacy email address, which is advocacy@ata.net, I believe. But you can go to the website and just reach out to us. I think the more people we can get involved and excited about speaking up, the better. I mean, look, Matt, we've been this profession that is used to being in the background, to staying in the background, right? You never hear of a good translator. You always hear of the bad translators. But
Right.
when it comes to things that affect our livelihoods, I think it is time for us to speak up. And we are great writers, aren't we, translators? And we are very articulate interpreters. And so why not use that skill, that talent for the good of the entire profession?
Yeah, use the power of language to advocate for our professions. I like that.
Yeah.
As one little footnote, I wanted to mention the JNCL newsletter, because if listeners are interested, they often put calls out when certain legislation is going through Congress, and they have really helpful links to help you find your congressman and your senator, and also some templates for letters and things. So if you really are interested in doing your part as just an individual and right from the comfort of your own home, I would encourage listeners to sign up for that newsletter and watch for those calls to action.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great resource, Matt.
Well, Lorena, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for joining me today. And, thank you for all that you are doing for the translation and interpreting professions. It is a lot, and it's been a real pleasure having you back on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Matt. The pleasure's all mine.
All right, that's a wrap. I'd like to thank everyone who helped produce the show today. Derek Platts mixed and edited the audio. Ben Carl is the voice behind the announcements, and Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. If you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's someone out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about the podcast. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. Joining ATA literally launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make the difference. And ATA isn't just for translators and interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can join. We have teachers and professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. If you'd like to know more, go to ATA's website, atanet.org. You can also check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.